Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the soft, quiet hum of your surroundings. Imagine that the air around you is still, as though the world itself is holding its breath. In this calm space, let us drift slowly, gently, back through the centuries, back through the decades, to the lives of the people who came before you. Not the famous rulers, not the warriors or kings, but your ancestors. The ordinary men and women whose lives, their quiet routines, their small joys, their endless days, are the strands that connect directly to you. If we think about it carefully, we might wonder, how far back could you actually talk to your ancestors if it were possible? Could you sit with your grandfather, your great-grandmother, or someone who lived hundreds, even thousands of years ago? Could you hear their voices, see their homes, the clothes they wore, the meals they ate, the world they knew? We begin slowly, softly, stepping into the world of our ancestors, as though through a mist. And as we move, remember, there is no rush. There is only time, stretching back gently, layer by layer. We will start with the simplest question, a question that is easy to imagine, yet quietly profound. Who were your ancestors just 100 years ago? 100 years ago, your great-grandparents were alive. They were ordinary people, living ordinary lives. Perhaps they lived in a small town, or maybe a village where everyone knew each other. Imagine the streets they walked along, the smell of the bakery in the morning, the sound of horses clopping on cobblestones, or maybe the rumble of early automobiles. The world they knew was very different from yours. Electricity was spreading slowly. Not every house had light at night. Many households relied on wood or coal fires to cook, to warm their homes. They wrote letters, slowly, with ink and paper, and sent them by post. They waited days, even weeks, for a reply. Their news came from newspapers or by listening to the radio, which was still a relatively new invention. Picture them in their homes. Perhaps your great-grandmother sat sewing quietly, mending clothes or knitting stockings. Perhaps your great-grandfather tended to a small farm or worked in a factory. Maybe they dressed very formally compared to what we wear today. Long dresses, hats, coats, gloves, even indoors. Life was slower, simpler, and yet, for them, it was the whole world. If you could speak to them, what would they notice first? Would they marvel at your smartphone, your ability to travel easily, your knowledge of distant lands? Or would they look at you as a part of the same family line, the same small story, continuing through generations? They would ask about your life, but you would also ask about theirs. And slowly, you would begin to hear the rhythms of the past, the daily chores, the smells of the kitchen, the songs sung in the evening, the worries they held quietly, the joys they celebrated in small ways. 100 years is not so long ago. You can almost imagine the words, almost imagine the faces. And yet, as we move back further, we enter times that are stranger, more distant, and yet strangely familiar. 200 years ago, the world was even quieter, slower, and in many ways, smaller. Your ancestors lived in a time when life moved by the rhythm of the sun and the seasons. Clocks existed, of course, but time was more about daylight than minutes and seconds. People rose with the morning light and rested when the sun went down. Imagine a small town or village where neighbors knew each other by sight and by name. Roads were dusty in the summer and muddy in the winter. Travel was slow. A trip that today might take an hour could take a whole day or more. Most people rarely left the place they were born. Their entire world might stretch only as far as the nearest market, the nearest river, or the nearest forest. The houses they lived in were often simple. Wood, stone, or brick held walls together. Fires warmed the rooms. Smoke drifted from chimneys, carrying the smell of burning wood or coal. People worked with their hands. Farmers tilled the soil. Craftsmen carved, hammered, or stitched. Women baked bread, churned butter, and cared for children. Life required effort and patience. In the early 1800s, your ancestors did not know about electricity, cars, or telephones. Their letters were written with quills or early pens. They waited for news, sometimes for weeks, from distant places. They listened to neighbors, storytellers, and the occasional traveling musician. Life was about observation, memory, and careful listening. Now, imagine yourself sitting across from one of these ancestors. You might ask them about their daily life. They would describe it slowly, carefully. Perhaps they would tell you about planting crops in spring, tending animals in summer, harvesting in autumn, and preparing for winter. Perhaps they would speak of local festivals, of dances, of songs passed down for generations. Your world would seem vast to them. Electricity, airplanes, machines, these would be unbelievable. And yet, in your voices, in your curiosity, they might recognize something familiar. The same desire to live, to survive, to understand the world, and to care for family. 200 years is a long time, and still, if we close our eyes, we can imagine the faces, the hands, the voices of our ancestors. We can imagine the quiet rhythm of their days. We can hear the soft sounds of a world that existed before our world. A world that is still part of us, quietly, invisibly. 500 years ago, the world was changing. The Renaissance was beginning in Europe. Art, science, and literature were starting to bloom. Your ancestors of this time may have lived in villages, towns, or bustling cities that were very different from the cities you know today. Stone streets, wooden carts, and horse-drawn wagons were everywhere. The air smelled of smoke, wood, and bread baking. was both simple and unpredictable. Imagine a small town. People lived in houses made of wood or stone, with thatched roofs or tiles. Windows were small. Fires were used for cooking and warmth. People slept on straw mattresses or simple wooden beds. Daily life involved labor, slowly, deliberately, as the day required. Most of your ancestors worked with their hands. Farmers planted and harvested crops according to the seasons. Blacksmiths hammered metal into tools and horseshoes. Tailors stitched garments from rough cloth. Women baked bread, brewed ale, washed clothes, and cared for children. Life demanded patience, strength, and routine. The world around them was noisy with human activity, yet quiet in comparison to today's world. There was no electricity, no cars, no telephones. Light came from the sun by day, and candles or oil lamps by night. Sounds of neighbors, of animals, and of simple instruments filled the air. If you could speak to an ancestor from 500 years ago, what would they see in you? Perhaps they would marvel at your clothes, your food, your language, or the strange objects you carry. And yet, in your eyes, they might see something familiar. The same curiosity, the same care for family, the same quiet thoughts at night. They might tell you about local festivals, about markets where spices, fabrics, and tools were sold. They might speak of distant rulers, of local lords, of wars or alliances. They might tell you about the changing seasons, about the crops that failed, or the celebrations that brought everyone together. 500 years ago feels distant. But if we imagine it carefully, we can picture faces, homes, and routines. We can hear the sounds of the village, the clatter of horses, the chatter of neighbors. We can feel the rhythm of their days and nights, the rise and fall of their lives. And we can sense that even in a world so far from ours, our ancestors lived with hopes and fears that are not so different from our own. 1,000 years ago, the world was a very different place. Your ancestors lived in the early medieval period in small villages, towns, or castles. Life was slower, harder, and more connected to the land than anything you know today. People relied on the earth for food, for shelter, and for survival. Every day demanded effort, and every season shaped their lives. Imagine a village in Europe. The streets were muddy, often uneven, and smelled of wood smoke, animals, and fresh earth. Houses were simple, timber frames, thatched roofs, and small windows. Fireplaces warmed the rooms, though the smoke often filled the space. People slept on straw mattresses, huddled for warmth, often with a family and sometimes with livestock in the same space. Your ancestors were farmers, blacksmiths, weavers, or simple laborers. Men worked in the fields, plowing, sowing, harvesting. Women tended the home, spun wool, baked bread, and cared for children. Children helped as soon as they could, learning the work of the household or farm. Life was physically demanding, and every day was tied closely to the cycles of nature. Travel was rare and difficult. Roads were rough, and journeys could be dangerous. Markets were local, and most people rarely saw far beyond their village. News traveled slowly, often by word of mouth, by travelers, or by traveling monks and traders. Letters existed, but literacy was limited. Few could read or write. Stories, songs, and oral traditions were the main way knowledge passed from generation to generation. If you could meet an ancestor from this time, they would see a world beyond their imagining in you. Your clothes, your tools, your strange foods, your language, your strange machines. And yet, they would notice the same human qualities. They would recognize curiosity, the desire to learn, to understand, to care for family. Life was hard. Disease, famine, and war were constant threats. Yet people also experienced joy. Festivals, religious ceremonies, family gatherings, and quiet moments in their homes. Music, simple games, and storytelling filled the evenings. They celebrated the harvest, the seasons, and life itself in ways deeply connected to the land and to each other. 1,000 years ago may feel very far away, and yet, when you imagine it carefully, you can almost hear the rhythm of their lives. The clatter of tools, the chatter of neighbors, the lowing of cows, the laughter of children. You can picture faces, homes, and routines, and you can sense the quiet thread that connects them to you, the living echo of family stretching back through the centuries. 1.5 millennia ago, the world looked very different. The Roman Empire had changed, shrunk, and transformed. Your ancestors lived in a time of transition. Cities existed, but they were centers of trade, religion, and power rather than comfort. Roads connected distant lands, and armies moved along them, enforcing order or sometimes bringing conflict. Picture a city in the late Roman world. Stone buildings lined narrow streets. Markets were crowded with people selling goods from nearby farms, distant provinces, or foreign lands. The smell of spices, bread, animals, and smoke filled the air. Public fountains and baths were common in larger towns, and people gathered there to meet, talk, and wash. Your ancestors might have been farmers, artisans, merchants, or soldiers. Life demanded work and skill. Farmers labored in fields without modern tools. Artisans shaped clay, wood, and metal into tools, weapons, or household items. Merchants traveled from town to town, sometimes taking great risks. Soldiers marched, guarded cities, and defended borders. Every role was important Every day required effort. Homes were modest. Wealthier families lived in stone or brick houses, sometimes with mosaics or painted walls. Most people lived in simpler dwellings, 1 or 2 rooms, with straw mats or simple bedding. Cooking was over open fires. Food was seasonal, and hygiene was rudimentary. Life was often harsh, and survival depended on skill, cooperation, and luck. Travel was more common than in previous centuries, but it was slow and often dangerous. News traveled along roads, rivers, and trade routes. Stories, laws, and customs moved from place to place, connecting people across distances. Your ancestors understood local traditions deeply, but they also witnessed changes from distant events, new rulers, invasions, plagues, or trade. If you could meet them, your appearance, your language, and your knowledge would seem strange. They would look at your clothing, your devices, your books, your tools, and wonder. Yet they would recognize something familiar in your manner, your curiosity, and your questions. Life was uncertain. Disease, famine, and political unrest were constant threats. But life was also rich with human experience. Music, storytelling, festivals, and religious rituals marked the passage of time. Families worked together, children learned skills from parents, and communities celebrated seasonal events, marriages, and births. 1,500 years ago feels distant, and yet, with careful imagination, you can picture their daily lives. You can hear the sounds of the streets, the chatter of the market, the hammering of tools, the laughter of children. You can sense the connection between your life and theirs, the continuity of ordinary human experience stretching quietly through time. 2,000 years ago, the world was a patchwork of empires, kingdoms, and tribes. Your ancestors lived in times when the Roman Empire stretched across much of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Cities were bustling with life. Soldiers patrolled streets, and trade connected distant lands. Yet many people lived far from the grandeur of Rome, in villages or rural areas where daily life was simple and dictated by the land. Picture a Roman town. Stone buildings rose along streets paved with cobblestones. Markets were filled with merchants selling bread, olives, wine, pottery, and cloth. Public baths were places of social gathering where citizens met to bathe, exercise, and talk. Temples, shrines, and statues reminded everyone of gods and rulers. In the countryside, life was quieter. Fields, pastures, and small farms dominated the landscape. Your ancestors could have been farmers tending crops and livestock, soldiers marching in legions, artisans shaping tools and goods, or merchants trading across rivers and roads. Life required hard work and skill. Most people were deeply aware of the rhythm of the seasons, of planting, harvesting, hunting, and preserving food. Every day demanded effort, cooperation, and attention. Homes varied. Wealthy families lived in villas with multiple rooms, painted walls, and mosaic floors. Most people lived in modest houses with 1 or 2 rooms, simple furniture, and beds made of straw. Cooking was over open flames, and water came from wells, fountains, or nearby streams. Cleanliness was relative, and life was often rough, but communities were tight-knit. Travel was possible, but slow. Roads and rivers were lifelines connecting towns, cities, and regions. Messages and goods traveled by foot, horse, or cart. News of distant events, wars, festivals traveled along these routes, slowly reaching villages far from the centers of power. Imagine meeting an ancestor from this time. They would see you as strange. Your clothing, your tools, your strange foods, your words. Yet they would recognize human curiosity, care for family, and a desire to survive. They would share their own concerns. The work in the fields, the maintenance of their homes, the health of their children, the rhythm of life. Life was uncertain. Disease, famine, war, and political intrigue were constant possibilities. Yet even in hardship, people found joy. Music, dance, storytelling, festivals, and simple moments with family. The seasons marked the passage of time, and each day carried its own rituals, challenges, and small pleasures. 2,000 years ago may seem very far, and yet, as you imagine their faces, homes, and routines, you can feel the quiet continuity of human life. You can hear the clatter of tools, the chatter of markets, the lowing of animals, and the soft laughter of children. You can sense that even across 2 millennia, your ancestors lived, loved, and struggled in ways that echo in your own life. 3,000 years ago, your ancestors lived in a world very different from ours today. Cities were just beginning to form, but most people lived in small villages. The tools they used were made of bronze, the metal that gave this age its name. Agriculture was the foundation of life. Fields were plowed by hand or with simple plows, and irrigation sometimes helped crops grow. Livestock provided milk, meat, and labor. Imagine a village. Houses were made of mud bricks, wood, or stone. Roofs were thatched or made from simple tiles. Rooms were small, and furniture was minimal. People slept on mats or simple beds. Fire was essential for warmth and cooking, and smoke often filled the homes. Life was slower, tied to sunlight, seasons, and weather. Your ancestors were farmers, herders, potters, weavers, or hunters. They crafted tools, bowls, and weapons from bronze and wood. They prepared food carefully, stored it for winter, and passed knowledge from parent to child. Every day required effort and skill. Survival depended on cooperation, foresight, and connection to the land. Trade existed, but was limited. Goods traveled by foot, river, or simple carts. Ideas, stories, and techniques also spread slowly. People told stories of gods, heroes, and ancestors. They celebrated seasonal events, harvests, and local ceremonies. Music and ritual marked important moments in life. Imagine meeting an ancestor from 3,000 years ago. They would see you as strange, your clothes and objects foreign. Yet they would recognize human curiosity, intelligence, and care. They would share their own concerns, tending fields, feeding animals, preparing food, protecting families, and living in rhythm with the seasons. Life was uncertain. Floods, droughts, and disease were constant threats. Yet, in their daily lives, people found joy. Music, dance, storytelling, feasts, and small acts of kindness. Families worked together, shared meals, and passed on knowledge to the next generation. 3,000 years ago feels far, almost unimaginable. And yet, as you picture their homes, their fields, their hands shaping tools and food, you can sense the continuity of life. The ordinary rhythms, the work, the care, and the small joys connect you quietly to them across millennia. 5,000 years ago, your ancestors lived in a world that was slowly becoming recognizable as the birthplace of civilization. Cities were forming along rivers, fertile valleys where agriculture could support larger communities. The first writing systems appeared, allowing people to record transactions, events, and ideas. Trade connected settlements, and early governments began to organize labor and resources. Imagine a city in Mesopotamia, along the banks of the Tigris or Euphrates. Houses were built of mud bricks, flat-roofed with small courtyards. Streets were narrow, winding, and crowded. Markets were lively, with people selling grain, pottery, textiles, and tools. The air smelled of smoke, cooking food, and the animals kept close to homes. Life was organized around work, ritual, and survival. Your ancestors farmed the land, tended livestock, or crafted tools and goods. Potters shaped clay into bowls and jars. Weavers turned wool and flax into cloth. Builders laid bricks for homes, walls, and temples. Every person had a role, and their daily labor was essential to the community. Religion and ritual were central. Temples, shrines, and altars marked cities and villages. Priests, rulers, and elders guided ceremonies, festivals, and offerings. People believed in gods and spirits that influenced every aspect of life. They sought protection, guidance, and understanding through ritual and tradition. Imagine meeting one of these ancestors. They would see you as strange, your clothing, your tools, and your language unlike anything they know. And yet, they would recognize curiosity, intelligence, and care. They would share their own life, planting, harvesting, crafting, building, protecting families, celebrating festivals, and honoring gods. Life was challenging. Floods, droughts, disease, and conflict threatened survival. Yet people also experienced joy. Festivals, music, storytelling, and small moments of leisure. Families worked together, shared food, and passed knowledge to the next generation. 5,000 years ago feels distant, but you can imagine the rhythm of daily life. The work in the fields, the clatter of tools, the chatter in markets, the laughter of children, and the solemnity of ritual. You can see their homes, their hands, and their faces, and sense the quiet thread that connects them to you, weaving a story across millennia. 10,000 years ago, your ancestors lived in a world that was just beginning to change from wandering hunter-gatherers to settled farmers. They domesticated plants and animals, planted seeds in the soil, and learned to tend crops year after year. Small villages began to form, often near rivers or fertile land, where life could be sustained by the land and its gifts. Imagine a Neolithic village. Simple houses made of mud, wood, and straw formed clusters of homes. The air smelled of smoke, wood fires, and freshly turned soil. People worked together, building homes, tending animals, and preparing food for the community. Life was slow, deliberate, and connected to the rhythms of the earth. Your ancestors were farmers, herders, toolmakers, and gatherers. They grew wheat, barley, lentils, and other crops. They raised sheep, goats, and cattle. Stone tools were common, sharpened carefully for cutting, digging, and harvesting. They crafted pottery for storing grain, water, and food. Every day required effort, patience, and careful attention to survival. Communication was direct and personal. Stories, songs, and lessons were passed from parent to child. Knowledge about planting, hunting, and crafting was carefully preserved. Rituals marked the seasons, planting in spring, harvesting in autumn, and celebrating the cycles of the sun and moon. If you could meet an ancestor from this time, they would see you as almost magical. Your clothes, your speech, your strange tools, your strange foods, they would not recognize any of it. Yet they would understand human care, curiosity, and the desire to live and protect family. You would listen to them describe their work, their homes, their fields, their animals, their celebrations, and their fears. Life was precarious. Crop failures, disease, wild animals, and weather could threaten survival. Yet people found joy in community, in shared labor, in music, storytelling, and celebration. Families and communities were tight-knit, sharing knowledge, food, and protection. 10,000 years ago may feel unimaginable. And yet, when you picture their homes, their hands working the land, their children playing nearby, and the quiet rhythm of the village, you can feel a thread connecting you to them. Their lives, full of labor, care, and small joys, quietly echo in your own existence today. 20,000 years ago, the world was colder, harsher, and wilder. Ice sheets covered large parts of the northern continents. Your ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, following animals, and foraging for plants. Survival required skill, cooperation, and constant attention to the environment. Imagine a group of humans huddled around a fire, the smoke rising into the cold air. Tents made of animal hides or simple huts provided shelter. The wind howled across frozen plains, and snow blanketed much of the landscape. Life was dangerous and uncertain. Every day brought the challenge of finding food, staying warm, and avoiding predators. Your ancestors hunted large animals such as mammoths, bison, and reindeer. They used spears, bows, and traps, crafted with skill and care. Women and children gathered edible plants, berries, nuts, and roots. They made clothing from animal hides, sewn together with sinew to keep warm in the freezing temperatures. Every action was deliberate, and every skill mattered. Communication was essential. Stories, knowledge, and strategies were passed orally from elders to the young. Songs, chants, and art on cave walls conveyed experiences, lessons, and beliefs. People held rituals to honor animals, spirits, and the forces of nature. Life was deeply connected to the land, to the animals, and to each other. If you could meet an ancestor from this time, they would see you as unlike any being they had known. Your clothing, language, tools, and food would be utterly strange. Yet, they would recognize the human qualities you share: curiosity, care, attention to family, and the desire to survive. You would hear their stories of hunting, of tracking, of finding shelter, and of sharing food and warmth with the group. Life was unforgiving. Cold, hunger, injury, and predators were constant threats. Yet people also experienced joy through communal activities, storytelling, and the bonds of family and tribe. They celebrated successful hunts, survival through harsh winters, and the continuance of life itself. 20,000 years ago feels remote, almost unimaginable. And yet, when you imagine the small group huddled near the fire, shaping tools, preparing food, and telling stories, you can sense the same human thread that connects you to them. Their care, their effort, their joy, and their survival echo through the millennia to your own life today. 40,000 years ago, your ancestors were part of a small, roaming population of modern humans. They traveled across continents, settling where resources allowed, following animals, rivers, and seasons. Life was harsh, unpredictable, and full of danger. Yet humans had learned to adapt, to communicate, and to create tools and symbols that would carry culture forward. Picture a family or small group huddled in a rocky shelter or temporary camp. The fire glows warmly against the night. Outside, the wind blows across vast plains, forests, or ice-covered landscapes. The group relies on each other for warmth, protection, and survival. Every day involves hunting, gathering, crafting, and teaching the young the skills they will need to survive. Your ancestors crafted tools from stone, bone, and wood. Spears, blades, scrapers, and needles allowed them to hunt, prepare food, and make clothing. They also created art paintings on cave walls, carved figurines, beads, and personal adornments. These objects were not merely decorative. They held meaning, communicated ideas, and connected people across generations. Communication was oral, full of gesture and tone. Songs, chants, stories, and rituals passed knowledge, experience, and values to the next generation. People honored animals, ancestors, and natural forces, expressing beliefs in ways that helped sustain social cohesion and understanding. Imagine meeting an ancestor from this time. They would perceive you as extraordinary, perhaps even strange. Your clothing, language, and strange tools would be unlike anything they knew. Yet, they would recognize intelligence, curiosity, and social care, the same qualities that allowed humans to thrive and survive. They would show you their shelters, their tools, their art, and tell you stories about hunting, gathering, and living in a world full of challenges. Life was dangerous. Predators, harsh climates, and scarcity of food were daily threats. Yet, humans persisted, celebrated small successes, shared food, and found joy in communal life, art, and rituals. Their existence was intertwined with nature, survival, and one another. 40,000 years ago feels extremely distant, and yet, if you close your eyes, you can imagine the firelight flickering on faces, the sound of voices, the rhythm of work and rest, the careful crafting of tools, and the creation of art. You can sense the thread that connects these first modern humans to you, a silent, enduring continuity of life, intelligence, and human experience stretching across millennia. 100,000 years ago, your ancestors lived in Africa, in the vast savannas, forests, and river valleys of the continent. Modern humans had already evolved, with the intelligence, adaptability, and curiosity that define our species. They lived in small groups, carefully moving with the seasons, hunting game, gathering plants, and learning to survive in a world full of challenges. Imagine a group resting by a river or near a cluster of trees. Fires flicker, providing warmth, light, and protection. People craft tools from stone, bone, and wood. Spears, scrapers, and cutting tools allow them to hunt, prepare food, and create simple shelters. Clothing is made from animal hides, draped or sewn carefully to protect against the elements. Every action is deliberate, every skill essential. Communication is oral, based on shared understanding, gesture, and tone. Stories, songs, and rituals pass knowledge across generations. They remember where water can be found, where animals roam, and which plants can be eaten or used for medicine. Rituals mark important events, seasonal changes, and the connection of the group to the land and to each other. If you could meet an ancestor from this time, they would see you as something entirely different. Your clothes, tools, language, and objects would be alien. Yet, they would recognize intelligence, curiosity, and the concern you show for others. They would share their life with you, hunting, gathering, crafting, teaching children, moving across the land, and caring for one another. Life was dangerous. Predators, illness, and scarcity of food were constant threats. Yet humans endured. They cooperated, shared resources, and found joy in social connection, ritual, music, and storytelling. Every small success, finding food, making a tool, protecting a child, was celebrated in quiet, human ways. 100,000 years ago may feel impossibly far. And yet, if you imagine carefully, you can picture their homes, their hands, their fires, the sounds of their voices, and the rhythm of life. You can sense the thread connecting them to you, the quiet continuity of survival, care, and human experience stretching from that distant past to the present moment. As we drift back through these centuries and millennia, we see that human life has always been a mixture of work, small joys. From your great-grandparents 100 years ago to the first modern humans in Africa, there is a continuous thread, a quiet story of human experience, connection, and resilience. If you close your eyes now, you can imagine all these lives overlapping: the faces, the voices, the tools, the fires, the fields, and the shelters. Every ancestor, in their own way, has passed something forward to you: knowledge, curiosity, resilience, and life itself. Across tens of thousands of years, across the entire human journey, your ancestors are quietly present, as if waiting for you to notice them. And now, as you sit or lie in stillness, imagine drifting back, closer and closer through time, until all these lives and stories quietly connect with yours. And the thread of humanity stretches endlessly from the distant past to the life you are living today. Long before modern humans appeared, your ancestors were part of the broader family of early humans and hominins in Africa. They lived in a world of forests, savannas, and open plains. Life was harsh and uncertain. Survival depended entirely on keen observation, skill, and cooperation. Imagine a group of Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus moving through a landscape of grasslands and scattered trees. Fires were just beginning to be mastered, providing warmth, light, and protection. Stone tools were rudimentary hand axes, scrapers, and sharpened rocks. Every tool, every skill mattered. Every day was a struggle for survival. Your ancestors hunted, gathered, and scavenged. They learned the behavior of animals, where water could be found, and which plants were edible or medicinal. They shared food, worked together, and developed early forms of communication, gestures, and social bonds. Even without language as we know it, knowledge passed carefully from elders to younger members of the group. If you could meet one of these ancestors, they would see you as something almost otherworldly. Your appearance, your clothes, your language, your toolsel would be completely foreign. Yet, they would recognize human intelligence, curiosity, and care for one another. They would show you how they hunted, how they cared for the young and the injured, how they shared and cooperated. Life was dangerous. Predators, climate, and disease were constant threats. Yet humans endured. They adapted, innovated, and persisted. They celebrated survival in small ways, sharing food, gathering together, and protecting the group. Even in these early times, humans were social, observant, and resilient. Going back 2 million years feels unimaginable. Yet, if you imagine carefully, you can picture the tools, the small camps, the fires, the social bonds, and the rhythm of life. You can sense the deep thread of humanity connecting you to these ancestors, millions of years of survival, intelligence, and care stretching forward to the life you know today. 4 to 6 million years ago, your ancestors were no longer modern humans, not even close. They were early hominins, walking upright in the African savannas, forests, and woodlands. Life was entirely shaped by nature's sun, rain, predators, and the land itself. These were small social groups, moving carefully, observing, learning, and surviving in a dangerous, untamed world. Picture a group of Australopithecines moving through grasslands. They walked on 2 legs, climbing trees when needed. They carried no tools, no fire, no complex shelters. Lived in the moment, relying on keen senses and cooperation to find food and avoid predators. Their days were dictated by the sun, by the seasons, and by the availability of water and fruit. Food came from gathering fruit, nuts and tubers, and occasionally scavenging meat. They observed animals, learned their habits, and stayed alert for danger. Young ones learned from elders by watching, copying, and practicing. Every day was a test of survival. Every skill mattered, and life was simple, yet fragile. If you could meet one of these ancestors, they would see you as utterly alien. Your body, your clothes, your strange objects, your speech, they would not recognize any of it. Yet, in your movements, your curiosity, your attention, they might recognize something familiar: intelligence, awareness, and social care. They would show you the land, the trees, the sources of food, and the paths they traveled. They would share survival in its most basic form, in ways that were instinctive, careful, and deeply human. Life was uncertain. Predators, drought, disease, and accidents threatened survival every day. Yet early hominins endured. They learned, adapted, and passed knowledge slowly to the next generation. Cooperation and awareness ensured survival. Even without tools, without fire, without written language, these small communities were laying the foundation for everything that would come later. 4 to 6 million years ago may feel impossibly far, and yet, if you imagine carefully, you can picture the small groups moving through the savannah, the young learning from elders, the families sharing food, the adults watching for danger, and the quiet rhythm of their lives. You can sense the thread that connects you to them, millions of years of survival, adaptation, and human experience stretching forward to you. With this, we have traced a complete ancestral journey from your great-grandparents to early hominins, spanning over 6 million years.